Hello, 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 hello. Welcome, welcome. Happy Saturday, happy weekend to you all. Um, just checking in. Mickey, Ram, welcome. Mickey has a question off the bat. So I was looking at this before getting this started, Graph API versus REST API. Um, all right, awesome. So we got some questions coming in. I think we can address these right away. Just let me know, just a quick confirmation in the chat. Can you guys hear me okay? Is my video okay? I reset my Wi-Fi and everything, so hopefully things are coming through okay. Harold, glad to see you made it, man. Um, yeah, just a quick note, just to make sure you guys can hear me okay, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, awesome, fantastic. All right, so off the bat, so the question was, we get it from Mickey. The background for the form used in the last video. I'm trying to think. I didn't do anything special with that form. Now here's one thing I did notice when it comes to these forms, right? Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. When it comes to these forms, I did notice from tenant to tenant that the backgrounds can be different. So I think I did this training one, right? Yeah, so this background here, this is something that came with the theme. So if I hit the theme, you see how all these options I have here, this was baked in. There was nothing I did special to make this come in. Now for this particular tenant, I am using Enterprise E3, and I don't know if you're using Enterprise, Mickey, or if you're using possibly another licensed version of wherever the scenario may be, but probably double check that. But yeah, from my side, I did not do anything special to bring those backgrounds in. So, just try the, that's the only thing I can confirm that, if you can probably confirm that one. All right. So Ram has Graph API versus REST API. Now, this is actually a very, very good question, and I don't know if I have a great example to show you on this one. Let me see. Maybe I can pull something up. Now, I've been playing around with the Graph API, and I would just tell you one thing for certain is that from a Microsoft perspective, definitely lean towards the Graph API. There's a couple things that we're starting to see come into play here, right? Now, when you say the REST API, I just assume you're referring to the SharePoint REST API. And the evolution that's happening here is that SharePoint REST API has been around since 2010, 2013, as far as like out of the box. And it became a formal REST API because before it was like a hack, right? We would do like VDI or VTI then underscore, and then it would bring back, I think, XML, and then we would convert it, or maybe there was a switch or something you can tell it to bring back JSON. That's still available in SharePoint Online, mostly for backwards compatibility. But with the graph, understand, especially if you look at this app launcher, you have so many workloads. Let me just screen this up. You have, they call it, applications or platforms. I think Microsoft refers to them as service workloads. So there's a team service workload. There's a SharePoint service workload. There is the Power App Automate platform, Power Apps platform. But, Planner is another one. Before, each one of these had their own API and they had their own signature. And they all handle authentication differently. The JSON structure that was returned was different. So now with the Graph API, is that we have one API and all of these workloads that we can now call. So from a development standpoint, it makes it super predictable, right? So so we got one graph signature to call, and then from here you're going to have Planner. Then you're going to have a way to get to Teams, a way to get to, now they refer to as Drive, which are actually your document libraries and your files, but that expands across files that are stored in SharePoint, as well as files stored into your OneDrive. And then you're going to have another scenario for, everything that we do with SharePoint. So, the Graph API is going to make these follow some type of standard regardless of how you get that information. And from a developer standpoint, that's a breath of fresh air, right? Because, now it's more predictable. Your code is, you can start to create patterns for these the code and so on and so forth. And not only can you call the graph from React or SPFX, you can also call the graph from C# and CSOM, right? And the two that I tend to gravitate toward, and there's so many options out there now centered around the Graph API, which kind of speaks to Microsoft's commitment to this, right? So if you look at the Graph API in all the different dev scenarios that you would play into, you have SPFX, and in there is a plugin, or not really a plugin, but there is a client for Graph API, and I love that client because it handles all of your authentication and all the other fun stuff for you. It puts you in the right position to handle the JSON that comes back. So there's definitely going to be a Graph API client for SPFX. Then you're going to have, this is the new one, and this is something that I've been playing around with, it's the PNP Core SDK. And this is where you want to use it in C#, right, .NET Core, and they really handle a lot of those scenarios that we have to deal with calling the Graph API, almost like how to avoid throttling, how to make calls with batches, and some of the other pieces that you kind of encounter when you start to jump in knee deep using the Graph API to make calls to SharePoint Online. The other piece is going to be the Graph. I think it's called this Graph API CLI. I want to say. And this is going to be like a console app that you can use the Graph API calls to kind of do like PowerShell calls or even just straight console calls. These are really meant to be attended versus unattended, but there are patterns to where you can call these unattended. And when I say unattended, I mean in the sense that you can schedule this and then, maybe you pass it a certificate thumbprint and a certificate application ID where you're kind of registering your authentication and authorization within Azure, and you're plugging all that information here. And the same is true here for the PNP Core. Like, in your app settings or wherever the case may be, you're going to have the thumbprint to your cert, the app ID for your cert, your tenant ID to say, okay, I'm authorized to make these types of calls, and this is the tenant I'm making these calls against, and all that's going to be stored in your app settings. The same is true here in the sense of PowerShell. So I would say definitely try, especially if you're just starting out, and Microsoft recommends this as well, you want to make your calls against the Graph API first, and then when there are gaps or when you can't find things, fall back to the SharePoint REST API. Okay, so I've used the Graph API to interact with Azure AD, to add users to Azure, to create groups in Azure, to move users around within Azure AD functions. I use the Graph API also for search, right? And if you ever built a search solution, you know how nasty that can get very quickly. The Graph API, some of that nastiness is still there, right? You still have to do manage properties, crawl properties, ... to go against the search capabilities, but the JSON return is just that much better, right? Because I think the SharePoint search, the SharePoint API search uses like a dictionary type format, whereas the Graph API search results are still going to use that JSON object and object in array type format. So it just, again, just a more natural way to consume that information. All right. M365 versus Office 365. I'm not exactly what you mean by that one. If you can add a little bit more clarity on that question, Ram, that would be great. I understand that when we talk about Microsoft 365 and Office 365, sometimes those names are used interchangeably to represent the Microsoft Cloud. there is a difference between a Microsoft 365 license versus an Office 365 license, whereas the Microsoft 365 license usually include your Windows 10 licensing and some other Intunes or mobile security and compliance and things along those lines for devices. So I, I guess if I had to sum up the differences, especially if your question is centered around licensing, the Microsoft 365 licensing will include everything that your Office will have as well as your devices, whereas Office would just be the Office apps, the Office suite, and the compliance and things like that. So pretty much things without the device in mind, right? So when we talk about devices, it's going to be your Windows 10 licensing. So like say, for example, you're a small business and you have 100 people. I would probably go with a Microsoft 365 license because you get the whole suite. You license all your OSs for all your company devices, as well as your Office products, as well as your cloud capabilities, right? With SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive for each user, where Office is that, in many organizations have different scenarios to where they already have an enterprise agreement to cover all of their server OSs and their client OSs for all their devices. And now they're starting to make this transition with the Office piece only. And my guess is down the road, when they go and renew those EAs, they probably will be negotiating with Microsoft to get into a more of a Microsoft 365 plan versus an Office 365 plan. Outside of the licensing piece, just understand that Office as a tenant, as a cloud solution or a cloud platform, Microsoft is actually in a marketing transition to really refer to that whole setup as Microsoft 365 versus Office 365. So again, usually you have to add a little bit more context around it when you start thinking about those pieces. Okay, so who else do we have? Oh, Robin. Okay, awesome. Thanks for confirmation. Ram has another question. The CRUD operation in SPFX using Azure Function. Very good question. So, Ram, you're knee deep in this SPFX, and it seems like you're really trying to understand the dev patterns and practice in the cloud, very similar to what we're used to on-prem. So this is something that I'm just now starting to scratch the surface with, and I really want to tell a much better story with it. But let me just switch over to the whiteboard again. When you're looking at CRUD operations, especially with Azure Functions, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. When I do CRUD operations, one, I try to do. I really want to frame this in the sense that you went through. Let's just make this assumption, just to kind of make this answer a little bit more complete. Let's just assume you went through the process and said, okay, based on these requirements, I exhausted looking at Power Automate, and that's not going to suit my need. I exhausted looking at SPFX solutions with out-of-the-box REST API, and that does not suit my need. And usually, when you go through these and you say Power Automate or the Power Platform, SPFX as the current user, those do not fit my need. That's usually because you're trying to elevate permissions, or you're trying to create a solution where the current user who's using your app may need elevated access to backend systems, and there's just not a clean way to do that. You can kind of do some of that with Power Automate, but you're not going to be able to do it in a real-time fashion, and there's going to be some delay. So assuming that you exhausted all of those and you still came back and said, no, we need SPFX, right? And then we also need some type of CSOM solution or some type of C# solution hosted in an Azure function to where I can now execute that Azure function through this SPFX. And usually that's the trigger. And let's say, so the situation we're working through in our lab is that we want a user to complete a form, and let's just assume that the form is in SPFX versus Power Automate. And when they complete that form and they fill out all the needed fields and they click submit, that submit would then be a REST API call to this Azure function, because Azure functions are actually exposed as endpoints, and you can call those and you can pass them parameters either through a post request or query string through your GET request. And then what that would do, understand that these Azure functions are sleep initially, right? They're not like Azure web jobs to where they're always up and running. As soon as you ping them, they're responding. And so there's a wake up period of what triggering this Azure function. But once you do that, you're going to execute your CSOM or your C# code. And this is where the PnP SDK really comes into play, because it's going to be that PnP SDK that I'm writing all my C# code against. And then that's just going to execute a bunch of instructions based on what that function needs to do. Now, just early this week, we ran into an issue with Azure functions that understand that when you spin up an Azure function, there are what they call them, I think they call them performance plans or price plans or something along those lines. And you have 3 to choose from, right? So you have a consumption plan, which is going to be your entry level. And each one of these plans, the biggest difference between them is how long they're running before they time out. So consumption plan, I think you can run it as a max of 10 minutes. The premium plan, you can run it as a max, and don't quote me on this, like 30 minutes or something like that. And then there's an app service plan where there's no time limit to where you can run it indefinitely. And that runtime means how long does it take your function to execute. Each one of these equates to dollars, right? So the higher the plan, the more your processing time or hourly rate or minute rate or whatever their unit of measure they're using to charge you, this is going to get expensive as you go down. Just Google search app service plans for Azure functions, right? So that's just one of the things to keep in mind. So, but as a developer, that forces you to write code that's efficient and use caching when and where possible, use the Azure storage blob when and where possible, use the Azure storage tables when and where possible, because those are different mechanisms here within the Azure ecosystem that you can leverage to kind of speed things up and to take advantage of caching. You know, it's the classic, once you get the information, you store it so that way when you need it, it's available and you're not recalling to get the information, especially if that information is static, right? So that would be the pattern though. So you have SPFX that you will have available to your end user, and after some part of that, they would trigger an endpoint which would fire off this function, and then this function would then execute this line of code, ideally in the PnP core SDK, which is the new pattern for C# development against SharePoint Online, so on and so forth. So hopefully that helps. If I didn't nail your question, go ahead and do a follow-up in the comment section. Who else we have? Edwin. No problem, Edwin. I'm glad to do it. Ram is on fire. Ram has a couple more questions in. So Ram, for the sake of being fair with others on the call, I'm gonna circle back to you. Kwayang says hello. We have Vinay. Well, Microsoft Dataverse, we have Office 365 E5 license, perfect, costs more than the standard alone SQL Server. I'm not 100% on that one. That's a very good question. The only caution I would have with jumping into Dataverse, especially in the context of Power Platform, I would exhaust SharePoint first. Use as much as you can with a SharePoint list, use as much as you can with a SharePoint document library. And then once you exhausted those storage mechanisms, or again, to Ram's point, once we start, we leapfrog into SPFX and Azure, have we exhausted all the free, the ones that come standard with our E5 in your scenario, have we exhausted all those scenarios? Or what in our requirement, what characteristic in our requirement is forcing us to look at Dataverse? Now, this is why this type of session is important, because we have Microsoft who is, they have their agendas, right? Their whole thing is to get you on the high end of costs with licensing to get you fully licensed when and where possible and things along those lines. But on the other side, from a practicality and budget and from a practice perspective, the goal is always to maximize what comes with our standard licensing before we build solutions up to that requires premium connectors, premium data storage, as in Dataverse, premium SQL, scenarios. Because once you do a SQL in Azure, that's another metered cost that we have. Never before, right, in this day and age, has the quality of development and the quality of solution architecture actually was very transparent to the bottom line. If you're not tooled up, and you're not, and I'm not saying this is your scenario at all. I'm just saying this in general because I see this a lot. If you as a developer or a solution architect or engineer is not tooled up on exhausting the pieces that come integrated, I'm hesitant to use the word free, but comes integrated with your licensing, you can actually cost the organization money because you're not taking advantage of what they're already paying for. The other piece of that is understanding how far you can get with those toolings and understand when you hear a requirement that says, okay, I can't do that in SharePoint, or the transactions are large, or I don't know. I'm struggling to understand the scenarios of where you cannot use SharePoint lists. 5,000 is not it, right? The 5,000 threshold. That's usually the first response I get when I say, well, how come you didn't do this in the list? Well, we have to store 10,000 items, or we have to store 2 million items. The SharePoint list is 30 million items, right? And you set up the indexes and you do whatever you need to do. It could be permissioning, right? The SharePoint list does not have a really good story with itemized permissioning. It does in a few scenarios, and as long as you can fit in those few scenarios, you're fine. But if you're doing something very transactional, that can be a problem. SQL, like if I'm looking at SharePoint lists to Dataverse to SQL would probably be my absolutely last resort, even though that's a traditional go-to. And that starts to speak to your skill and how much aware are you with what you can do in SharePoint versus what you can do in Dataverse versus the default go-to that we used to do 5, 10, 15 years ago, right? So it's one of those things. But to answer your question, I'm not familiar with that much with the rate plans on between SQL and Dataverse, which one to be cheaper and more expensive. But with both of those on the table, that's a flag to me that says, have we really exhausted everything that we can do out of the box, part of our licensing with SharePoint? So that would be my question. All right, Kwame, do you have any good tutorials to connect the graph and SPFX? I don't. Excuse me. I do not. Can you add a little bit more color? Oh, connect to the graph. Sorry. When I read your question, I immediately went to Azure. Connect to the graphic. Let me see if I can. I don't know if I have a tutorial. I'm trying to see if I can bring you up something that's not confidential, where I can show you some examples of that really quickly. If I don't, I will have one by next Saturday. To connect to the graph is actually not that bad. The only gotcha, and I'll show you here in a second. The only gotcha that you're going to run into is the way that they do permissioning in the graph, right? So we're used to SharePoint to where if I need read access to something, or if I need rewrite access to a list or library, whatever the case may be, I just expect my current user to have that. There's no special permissioning priming I need to do to my SPFX web part to make that happen. But with the Graph API, those one of the things that you have to solidify before launching your web part. And basically that just says that, if you're reading and writing to a SharePoint list, you have to load those permissions up front, and then you have to make sure that your admin or your tenant admin, actually, not just your SharePoint admin, your global tenant admin consent to the API permissioning that you're requesting. Now, here's the thing. The good news is whoever requested first is available for all SPFX web parts within that tenant, right? It's just a matter of if someone requested it or not, and then you will have to line it up. But outside of that, there is a different client. If you're used to calling SharePoint APIs within SPFX, you know that you use, I think it's called the SPHTTP client to make all your calls. There's a Graph API client to make those types of calls. And everything is pretty much similar. Yeah, everything is outside of that. I think the pattern is the same, because once you have the JSON, everything you do post grabbing that information is going to be the exact same. It's just jumping through the hoops to connect it. And I'm a big advocate of centralizing all those clients. So I have one function that does all my GET requests for SharePoint within my entire SPFX solution. I have one function that calls all my Graph API GET requests, and I say one function because for each verb, it's a different function. So you have one for GET, one for post, one for delete, so on and so forth. And then the parameters, I'm passing the API or the URI string of what I'm expecting to get. And then in the context of post, I'm going to pass into that function the request body, the JSON that I need to post request to that endpoint. But outside of that, you build them to where they're super generic, they're highly reusable. And once you get that pattern down, now as you bounce from SPFX project to SPF project, you already have your core plumbing or your util.js file in place. You drop that in, everything else becomes, what is the business logic for this piece. Let me see if I have, I have a couple of samples, but I don't think I use the graph in them. I think I use the SPFX. But either way, I'll take that as a takeaway. I'll do one for graph and search, because I think that's probably the most complex you're going to get. If you're able to do a search with the Graph API, everything else, any other scenario you want to do is pretty much cake. There's a lot of different scenarios that are instrumental to search, like filtering or refiners or sorting and connecting JSON to Fluent UI, which is not a search thing, but that's really good practice. So I'll see if I can pull something like that together for you for the next session. Okay, Harold, could you walk through how to use a master site built out in SPO, SharePoint Online, to create a site script? Ooh. This is one I'm in the middle of. Let me see. I'm gonna give you guys a sneak peek. Let me see if I have this available. Let me see what I got. Let me see if I can pull some tricks out of my bag for you, Harold. Come on. There is. It's actually super simple. You just have to. Hold on, let me see. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to scrub some of this information before I display it. All right, let me walk through this really quickly. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for this one, but I think this is a really good example to have. And once you have this, is the best thing since sliced bread. Let me hold on. Sorry for the anticipation. All right, this is what you need. Let me see. Yeah, this is what you need. The first thing is first, you want to get the PNP. Make sure you guys can see this. the first things first, you want to get the PNP, what do you call them, modules installed within PowerShell. Once you have that, here's the core. Without getting into the mechanics on how it's done, and this 20-line script is all you need. But and actually in here I do two pieces. The first thing you want to do is the URL to the source site, and then you're going to have the URL to your created site. The key is created. It has to already exist. And what this is going to do, this is going to layer in what's missing into that created site. Here's the XML file. This is for export only, right? So let me just do this, export, right? And then this config file is for, I want to say that's for export only as well. So I do the export and the import in the same script. And basically what happens is that it looks at this site, and this PNP doing all the magic behind it. It's just setting it up, right? One is knowing it exists, and two is configuring it, and then you're ready to rock and roll. The first thing it does, it looks at this master site, and this is a site collection. And in this master site, and this is how we use it, we're going to have many different pages. The home page is going to have all the web parts needed. The web parts are going to be configured to document libraries within that site. You're going to have several custom lists with different views, different custom columns, Like it's going to be a site that's ready to rock and roll. Here's the key. You can actually pull down a site from the lookbook, right? And if you guys have been playing around with that, those that have your own dev tenant, which everybody on this call should have, you can pull the entire site collection down from the lookbook, get all of that information, and use that as a master site that says, okay, whenever they want to pull together a project site, this is the site template we're going to use. So this is what this is going to do. So it takes that URL, it extracts all that information, all that configuration to this XML file. This config file, and I'll dig this up and show you what this looks like. This config file tells that export process what information you want to grab. If you want to grab the top navigation, it was like, yep, give me the top. If you want to grab all the pages in that site, it's like, yep, grab me all the pages. If you want to grab the list and libraries and the data that's in the list and libraries, that's a configuration setting. You say, yep, grab all that information. So it will grab all that information, dump it into this XML, and then once you connect and you say get provisioning template, this is where the config tells it what to grab, and this is the file, the XML of where it's going to store it. Once you have this, you notice the disconnect, you're done. That's your export. So ideally, you can split this up into two separate PowerShells, right? One to do the export and one to do the import, with the understanding that every time you do the import, you don't have to build the XML again. You can save those XMLs and just say, I just want to start, this is my project site template for internal, or this is my team site, or this is my department site. Like these are my templates, and you just store them with XML files under different names, On your import, that's what you do with lines 16 through 22. Basically, you tell it, where's the site that I need to provision, and what XML file I need to use to apply that provisioning. And this works so beautifully that once you see it, you probably get, you probably have a teardrop or whatever. But I mean, it works in so many different scenarios. So it's going to take all of those pages, all the web parts and all the other stuff, apply it to your site. And not only does it do that, and it does it pretty gracefully, it also, if the site exists, it will just pull down the pieces and then apply the missing components to that. Now, to your question, Harold, this is not a site script, because this was to replace the site script. Because at the end of the day, site scripts have gaps, right? So far, and I haven't played with the out-of-the-box site script yet, but site scripts, I haven't seen them add pages and add web parts to pages. I haven't seen them add data, like sample data for your default libraries and lists and things on those lines. What they do very well is that they're going to apply, they're going to button up your schema. So if you say, okay, my document library should have these columns, and my default document library should have these number of views, it does that very well with a site script, but there tend to be gaps. I love this solution better because it gives me everything, right? So let me show you an example of this. Let me show you this config file. Let me see if I can find you the config file real quick. So this config file is just going to be JSON, and I'm going to open this up in, yeah, I'm going to open this up here. All right, so what you're seeing here is the config, right? And remember I said that, you can tell it what you want to bring from that export, and this is where everything, these are all the options that they have. And if you look at the schema, you can just drop this into a browser. If you look into the schema, it will kind of spell out everything that you need to, all the capabilities that you have, right? And, and this is like I guess this is like the X's, I don't know, not the XML, but this lets you know like all the options that you have for each one of those types. This is not a copy and paste scenario. This is one of those, okay, here are the available properties. Here's the description of what this property is, and here's the type of that property. So then to use it, you would then say include security, which is a property alpha taxonomy, it looks like. Anyway, but it's the standard object property type scenario, but this is just the definition of what capabilities you have and what options that you have. With this schema, especially if you open this up in Visual Studio Code, I want to say with this schema reference, you should be able to control spacebar, and it shows you all the available options. And now you just compare and say, oh, okay, query. Then you look up here and say, oh, what can I do with query, and what does query mean? And you can find that in your schema, so on and so forth, right? And so usually if you see a description or something like that, it just explains on how to use it and use the sample code and things along those lines. But this is the config, and this is where you tell it like, okay, within my master site, I have an events list. I do want to bring in this events list. And this is another thing. You have to specify the lists and libraries that you want to bring in that XML. So if you have 20, it doesn't automatically give you all 20. You have to specify if you want it, and then 2, if you do bring it down, if you want it to include the data that comes with it. When you bring, if you set this to false, what it's going to do is going to bring down the events list, all the views and all the columns in that events list based on your master site, and then store that in XML. But if you set this to true, not only do you get the schema and the views, you also get the values that are part of that. Now, let me see if I can find the latest and greatest. And the PMP, they're changing this now. So let me see, PMP site provisioning PowerShell. Let's see. Using PowerShell. Yep. I think this is going to be your guy. This is an example of the XML. Thank goodness we don't have to build this by hand. That's just an example of it. And then this shows you how to apply it. So connect, and then that's the XML there. Yep. So I'll drop this into the chat window so that way you all have it. But yeah, I mean, once you have that, you're golden. And this is how I use it, right? So in my intents and purposes, if I go to my Tesla demo site, okay, this is my Tesla Timid. This is, and you probably saw this video where I'm using this as external sites for my external users as an extranet, right? So here we had, is that under Clardo? I can't find it. Let me see. I think it's Wayo. Yeah, so here we have files. So look at this site here. And this is actually a subsite. And that's the other thing. It works with subsites too, not just site collections. So these are very elaborate project sites that we use for external users. Again, this is a fictitious scenario to where we have a team at Tesla, and their whole purpose is to make sure that we create these charging stations with different partners, either gas stations or Myers or, different parking lots from other partners who are part of this program. And this is the project that will actually create it. And within that project, as you imagine, anytime you're breaking ground and you're building the structure, especially with an energy system that's required for this charging station, you're going to have to get, obviously you have a plan, and then you have a budget, but then you have key contacts on the project team here at Tesla that anyone at, Wayo's the gas station that will be hosting these, that they can get in touch with people. If there are meeting or reoccurring meetings or permits for that particular city and things along those lines, all the documentation that's needed, maybe status reports, presentations, they will upload permits, the status of the project. Like, again, all of this is just elaborate. Now, I'm making all of this up, right? Like, who's your team and all this other stuff. So if you look at this, if I go to the main site, so here's my project site here. This is internally at Tesla where they are monitoring. Oops, that's the wrong one. Where's my main site? I think it's going to be this one. So my main site here, this is Tesla, right? Monitoring for this one particular partner, Wayo. Wayo has all these locations that they want to spin up these charger sites. So every time there's a new location, we don't want someone to create all of this by hand. And as you can see here, these are carbon copies of the master because I use that PnP PowerShell to provision all of this. It provisioned all of the links. It provisioned the quick link settings, the icons, the labels. It provisioned this hero and all the photos and the links and the titles that go with the hero web part. It provisioned the baseline. This is the scenario in the config where I said, yes, bring down the document library and bring down the items within that document library because I had a folder structure that I wanted to baseline all those templates with. It brought down all the team members, right? And now I can go through and configure because maybe there is a different team per location. So it's going to be a mix of automation and manual because I can't do everything automated because there's many different scenarios. So yeah, I say, bring these in as placeholders. Then whoever the project manager is for this particular location, they would know like, oh no, that came with the template, so let me replace them. Easy fix. These web parts are your quick chart web parts. These came configured, right? There's web part properties and all that other stuff. These came configured, and I brought down the photo gallery. So maybe in my master site, I would do generic like photo 1, photo 2, photo 3, and then have screen grabs. But then my project owner or my site owner can now come in, delete what's not needed, and then replace this. But at least they have a photo gallery configured and ready to go. The same is true with my left navigation, so on and so forth. There's another, let me just call this out real quick and I'll get off the subject. There's another scenario in that config file to where you can tell it if you want to bring down the security groups or not, right? And understanding that the site permissions for one location may be different. And that's just something that you can say, yeah, bring it down as my default setting, or no, leave them empty, and then I will go ahead and hydrate that out. Again, the PnP compared to site templates, it's going to have this is new. That's why I'm hesitating. That's new. I haven't seen that. But what we're looking for is, I think it's change the look. So if I do change the look, and I probably can't do it here because this is a sub-site, but I think under change the look, there's a site script option, and then there's a drop down of all the available site scripts available to you. You can select them and then have them button it up. But again, that out of the box site scripting feature has so many gaps because at the time it did not do pages, web parts on the page, configuration for each web part, whereas the PnP provisioning engine would just take, and again, and that's the cool thing about it is I don't have to build this from scratch and then convert that to XML. I'm building this. I think the one with the 999 is my master. In this master, I'm building all of this in the UI, getting it configured, sharing the link with other team members to get their okay and say, yep, this looks good. We're good to go. Let's rock. And then I'm saving that off into an XML. And then every time I need to use this, using that provisioning engine to apply this exact same design to those new sites. All right. So yeah, so to touch your point, auto provisioning this is actually something that I'm looking into, Harold, with auto provisioning, because now I have that. Here's the thing about the Azure function. It can host PowerShell scripts. So now what you can do, you can take that PowerShell that I just showed you, host that into an Azure function, and now have that Azure function triggered by our Power Automate. So in this solution, and again, we're still working out the kinks here in the lab, but in that solution, this is what it would look like. You would have a user fill out a Power App form. That form would then save into a SharePoint list. The SharePoint list would then trigger the Power Automate. It does its thing if there's approvals needed or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's going to trigger that Azure function, which actually then runs that PowerShell script. And that's how you automate the entire process from end to end using that way. All right. Very, very good question. And that's something that we're actually getting close to wrapping it up. So hopefully that's something that I can share in a video here soon. All right. That would be great. Thanks, Kwame. Thanks, Lokasai. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. Robin said, can you point me to documentation that explains how to customize the site homepage? I'd like to learn how to add photos, links, both images. Yeah, very good question, Robin. I actually have, if you do a YouTube video, YouTube search, I think I have this really good, I'm going to say really good and pat myself on the back, but I've been getting a lot of feedback on this video series. So if you look on DeShon, SharePoint, yeah, this MI105, it's a video series that I create. And within here, I talk through not only setting up your intranet, but something, and this is in that video, I caution against just jumping in and doing, because actually the doing part is easy, right? It's this video series, and I think it's like 5 videos, will take you through soup to nuts. This is what you should think about. Here's your different navigation options. Here's your different site options. This is what you think about on the best practices with building out the navigation. Hint, hint, it's not your org structure. So we kind of go through all of that in this video, but I would say start here. If it gets down to the mechanics, like how do you, because some of this, once you get in it and you get familiar with the process and the framework, you can then start to be able to click around and figure out how to add quick links, how to add images, how to, the do's and don'ts and things along those lines. I do want to create an updated series on this because there's just new features and capabilities that have since been rolled out that in 2021, because I think this was created 2 years ago. So definitely since 2019, there's definitely a lot of different new capabilities and new strategies in that regard. So I will try to create an updated series on that probably by the end of July. So, if you give me 4 weeks, there's going to be an updated one. But for now, absolutely take a look at that and see if that hits your needs. All right. Did I use Planner to create? Now, that's a very good question. So understand my scenario, Robin, with the Whale site. So here in the Whale site, I have a global plan link, but this falls apart for guest users, right? So just keep in mind that this whole Whale scenario is meant to collaborate or interact with or be an extranet for users, for guest users outside of my tenant, right? And with that, as a guest users, there are certain features and capabilities you have access to. There's certain features and capabilities you would not have access to in that way. So I did use a planner, but it was really meant just to be used internally by the Tesla staff, right? So internal users only, and not necessarily by the external. But to your point, it may be easy, especially for an issue tracker, which is blowing up on me. But the issue tracker is one that we did make sure was exposed to the external users, because they could say, okay, we try to connect the main power source to the charging grid, and we ran into issues. So now we need a mechanic to come out and XYZ, whatever the scenario may be. But at least you're able to log that issue, when we do. But to your point, just because I'm dealing with guest users, I did not use Planner, but you can easily track tasks using a SharePoint list if needed. Great question. Admin practice classes, Rajesh, I would say I don't. Definitely, let me do this. Let me drop the link in the chat. I do have a Microsoft form to where I am gathering different ideas on different trainings are needed, or even different solutions are needed. And I will give you guys preference, because this thing has been blowing up out of control, and I need to figure out how to prioritize. But for you all who sacrifice your weekends to join me on these types of calls, because I know that you guys are weekend warriors and you're making those investments in yourself to learn, I would definitely want to give you guys preferential treatment, if you would. So let me drop this in the chat, and so that way you can fill it out. And I have a recording of this video, so I know exactly who's receiving this when I receive it. So give me 1 second, because I need to switch over to a different tenant to grab the URL to that form. And I'm trying to, Power Platform questions, ideas. I'm trying to drop this link inside of every video that I create, because that really just helps me keep a pulse on the issues that you all are facing. So here we go. So that's going to be in the chat. Go ahead and fill it in. AJ, what's going on, my friend? My dear friend AJ from Vegas is in the house. Glad to see you, sir. So yeah, I dropped the form in. So fill that form out. If there's any ideas or questions that you guys have as far as ideas or classes or things along those lines. But to help you out, if you do a YouTube search on, and this may not have enough meat on it to really help. Let's say DeShon admin. Yeah, 7 Pro SharePoint admin tips. That may be helpful. Just if you're filling the role as a SharePoint admin, some of the things that you can expect in that role, or even from an interviewing perspective, some of the things that if you're looking to transition to a new job or whatever, what you can expect from that role. I'm getting a lot of great feedback on this. It's an hour video. It barely scratches the surface, but I think it would definitely help you get in the right start. But definitely fill out that form if there are specific things that you're looking for, or specific scenarios that you're looking into. because from an admin, it's vast. This is way different than a SharePoint form admin that we're used to on-prem. This is, I have 20 admins, and each admin is responsible for different workloads, right? And if you're working with a smaller organization to where you have to wear many hats, you're right. I mean, from an admin perspective, you need to be aware of a lot of things, right? You need to be aware of, security and compliance. You need to be aware of, because again, that was all rolled into a SharePoint site collection before, whereas now it has its own center, very robust, by the way, but it has its own center on security and compliance in the sense of this is how we handling retention. This is how we handling data loss prevention. Oh yeah, when legal start giving you a call, say we need to do an e-discovery because we have a legal case and we need to find XYZ on this person or everything that happened in this date, you have to be in a position on how to handle that. More so than not, you just have to be aware, even though if you don't use it in practice, but be aware of what exists, because you never know when you're going to get that scenario and they're going to be looking to you as the go-to guy, the go-to girl on how to solve these types of problems. So from an administrator, I think that's a huge role, and that really puts you in a position to always keeping your pulse on what's coming down the pipe. Now, here's two things before I get off the subject, because I didn't think I would be able to answer it because it's such a broad question. Two things you should be aware of, and everyone should be aware of this. If you go into the admin portal, and most of you may say, well, I don't have access to my global admin, you should have your own dev tenant, would be my response to that. Two things you should monitor always. One is going to be the message center. The message center, and they keep moving it. Let me just search on message. The message center is going to tell you what's up and coming, and more importantly, what are recent changes that are either about to happen to your tenant or have already rolled out to your tenant, and as well as outages as well. Keep a pulse on the message center. You will learn so much here, and more than just reading these descriptions, but if there's a link to where you can learn more, to click that link to learn more, and it will give you more context. So that's one. The other thing, especially as an admin or a solution architect or whatever, you should have a pulse on the Microsoft 365 roadmap. This is another one. And this is just going to let you know what's rolling out, and more importantly, what's in development. I live here because you always hear that scenario. There's two reasons why you should live in what's in development. One, you're going to get complaints. I'm trying to do X, or this sucks, or this is not great, and X, Y, Z. You know how users can be. It just helps you understand if there's a gap, like if Microsoft is aware of that gap and they're currently, working on some of these capabilities. Two, it's just, especially if you're a developer, you don't want to run off and create something that Microsoft is building to make available out of the box, right? That's a scenario where if you know it's coming, you hold your business users off and say, wait, let's not burn budget on this capability because Microsoft is rolling this out. Two, once Microsoft rolls it out, they're going to constantly improve it. That's just one of the benefits of being on an evergreen platform in comparison to what we're used to on-prem, where new features and capabilities rolled out every 3 years. SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019, ... Now we're getting new features and capabilities and bug fixes, if not bi-weekly, at least every month, right? Totally different world. No more downtime, no more CU patching, no more upgrade. So for some clients and for some organizations, moving to the cloud could be their last SharePoint upgrade, right? Because once you're in the cloud, especially if you go modern, when you're migrating on-prem, that should be your go-to. you have to make a very compelling case not to go modern SharePoint versus classic SharePoint, right? Because if you go classic, that means you have to touch it again eventually to move it to modern. But if you go on-prem to modern, while you have the budget, you have the team, you have the project, now you're in the evergreen space, and it's a much better position to be in. And now once you go to modern SharePoint, then you can start focusing on how do I convert these InfoPath solutions to Power Platform solutions and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, definitely one of those scenarios to keep in mind. Okay, AJ, what do you have? You have, when you need to create a breadcrumb feature in modern SharePoint, would you use managed metadata or another solution? This is a very good question, and we hear this a lot, right? We hear this a lot where, clients are saying, okay, you got me in this modern SharePoint, DeShon, we started to drink the Kool-Aid. Where is my breadcrumb? And that breadcrumbs are so complex, right? Because here's the scenario you're going to run into. And I really don't have a good answer to your question. That's the short end of it. But here's the scenario that you're going to run into. If you want to take on the breadcrumb situation and you want to tackle that, always keep in mind that I can be on any one of these site collections, right? And have a breadcrumb that says, okay, you're a part of human resources, click here to go home. And if I click here to go home, it would take me back to that main page, that other site collection of the hub. I can disassociate this from that hub and reassociate that to another hub. And my sneaky suspicion, because we have that flexibility, my sneaky suspicion is that's why Microsoft has not rolled out a breadcrumb solution yet. And again, back to our roadmap, double check the roadmap and make sure that they're not working on it. But the fact that as a site owner, I can move my site collection from one hub and move it to another hub that has a different navigation structure and all this other fun stuff, your breadcrumb has to be able to update and realize that. And because these structures are flat, your breadcrumb almost have to be as flexible as we have with our navigation, right? Because now in the navigation, I'm disconnected, I'm decoupled from my site structure. And when I click edit here in my navigation, I can make this look and feel however I need to make this look and feel, right? This is no longer driven by how my site is structured. And that's what the breadcrumb insinuates. Like the breadcrumb insinuates that you're here and you're 4 levels deep, and this is how you get back to, the parent area. And that's just not the reality anymore, right? So I think the breadcrumb is however you decide to build it. If you decide to tackle it, my architecture hat would say you will want to build it in a way. Term store is probably not a bad idea, because you will want to build it in a way to where it's disassociated from the site structure. And that's the thing, like you're going to have to figure out how to make it flexible for when they reassociate their site to a different hub, right? And how do you do that systematically, right? Because it may not be a scenario to where and sometimes you may, like you personally, you may know, because I understand how you roll and how you structure your sites and your setup. But in another scenario, it may be where you just don't have the say with that site owner, and that site owner starts move things around, and now you have this breadcrumb that don't represent that move. I think that's the biggest gotcha. So again, I would say if you were going to do it, I would probably use the term store, because it's global, it spans across all site collections, which is what you're going to need. But you have to figure out that scenario, like, okay, if they move this on me and this structure no longer holds true, how do they update it, right? Like almost like there has to be something in that site collection that says, okay, here's my term store structure. Now with this move, I want to put my site in this part of the hierarchy, right? You that's the missing piece. Like, how do you do that? I don't know. Very good question though. I don't know. I have to think about it more. I'm sure if you think on it long enough, especially as creative as you are, if you think of it long enough, you'll figure out a way. But I would say those scenarios you want to keep in mind, but term store is probably not a bad idea. Muhammad, how are you? Okay, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many relationship with lists, dynamic ID, Power Apps, form, full detailed video for beginners. Okay, so a little oxymoron in that comment, only in the sense that one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many in a list structure is probably not a beginner concept. How would you handle that? How would you handle a one to many, many to one, and a many to many? Is that right? One or one to one to many, many to many. In the power, I would keep it loose. So okay, let's do this. Let's fire up the whiteboard. I would say keep it loose. I would say if you're looking at this, and this is not responding to my clicks for whatever reason, you're looking at a very, it's a very good question though. But part of me, based on that question, you almost have to make sure that you understand the power of SharePoint lists, right? When it comes to a data design and data schema. And I'm glad AJ's here, and because I think him and I have been to war on many of these types of discussions before. So if you're looking at, let's just make up a day. Let me make up a scenario. Oh, so we have an intern, right? My son Keelan, and he just started working on Power Apps. And I love working with Keelan, and he's 14. He'll be 14 in July. I love working with Keelan because his creativity is not limited to the technology. Like, he's still green, and he has no sense of technological limitation. And I love working with users like that, even business users. And I encourage those that come from the SharePoint background, because they immediately go into solutioning and they keep their eye off how should the app work and what's the best experience for the end user. So what Keelan's doing, he just started working on this. And actually, I think I probably, and don't tell him, guys, please don't tell him. I probably can bring up his mock-up. Let me see if I can bring this up. So he's working on this park registration app. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this is Keelan's work. So Keelan, he did all of this on his own, and I coached him along the way. But this is all him based on his imagination. Again, he has no sense of technology limitation. So he has this app, and as you can see, we can go through this. I think I can preview this and quickly go through these screenshots. So the first thing he does, he was like, okay, I'm building this app. I need to capture username and password. We talked through that. We say, dude, by the time they get to your app, they're authenticated. You don't need to know this. You probably come out better just showing their profile pic. And I think he started to do this a little bit and just say, welcome DeShon, click here to reserve your park or whatever. So he's going to have this front end. And again, to Muhammad's point, just start imagining the data structure that's needed for this. And this is where Keelan and I are going to get to next. So he's looking at this. You got an item, a record that represents the park, right? If you go back here, this is all fluff, right? But you're going to have a rating system, which is going to be interesting, right? So they're going to be, and I have to talk to him to see what this rating system means. Like, is this the rating of the park, or is this his rating based on the park, his experience in the park? So that's one of the pieces we would have to do. So you have these image, you have the park title, you have the park description, you have this learn more. Okay, so he has some GPS in here, just parks that are near you. That's going to be interesting. And then you have your favorite park. So there's some personalization piece into that, which is going to be interesting. Here's the detailed record of the park. And then there's a reservation. So not only do you have your personal favorites, but also you have your own reservations. Oh, here I think he was trying to do a photo gallery. So for each park, again, this is to Muhammad, to your point, this is could be a one-to-many for that one particular record, because now I got many photos to account for that one particular park. I think this is just another, right? And then this is the reservation. So now reserve your space. So now on the reservation record, you're going to have the date to reserve it. I assume there's a park. We did talk about, here's another layer or another dimension. How do you do many areas within the same park, right? So you have a park, and we've seen them, right? You go to the park and you may have what do they call them? The space where that has the benches and then the area. And then, for us, like this is where you barbecue. And then, the shelters, right? So you may have shelter 1, shelter 2, shelter 3, and you may have like 50 shelters in one park. So here, how do you reserve that particular shelter? And if you reserve a park, especially when we started to reserve it, like for reunions and stuff like that, we need to understand the characteristics of the shelter, right? How many people can you fit in there? How far is it from the restroom? What's nearby? Is there a swing set nearby? Or is there a pool? Or is there a rec center? How far away is it? And what can I do if I reserve the shelter in area 1 versus another shelter in area 15, right? So you got some other characteristics that you probably want to highlight here. And then, so I think here's some other pieces to it. But anyway, so to your point, so if we use Keelan's example on setting this up, so we're going to have let's just look at this from a schema perspective. So we're going to have the park, right? So this is going to be the park record. And we talked about, and here's your one-to-many, where the park can have many different photos, right? And the park can also have many different areas, right? And let's just assume, well, okay, let's redraw that. So maybe the park can have, maybe the park can have different photos, but these are general photos of the park, right? And you can have photos of area 1, area 2. These are generic, they're scattered, and it's a marketing thing where you highlight some of the key characteristics of the park, right? So that's going to be off the park. The park also has different shelters that we talked about, right? And it's actually, when you talk about reservation, it's the shelter that you're reserving. So you're going to have this hierarchy here as well, right? And all of this is going to feed into that park. Now, once you get your shelter, then you can and this is where you get granular, where you have different photos for that particular shelter. And this just, again, giving people a sense of, okay, you can do this in the shelter. You have this pictures of the shelter, and so on and so forth. Now, for each one of these records, let's just put an S for the shelter. And then these are picks 1, like pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, ... Right? Now, most of you guys now as I'm spelling this out, start to imagine like how you would build this in a SharePoint list. If this was a database, you're right. To Muhammad's point, I'm going to have one-to-many, many-to-many, ... right? All these other and foreign keys and all this other fun stuff that I have to build. But if I look at this in the context of, and we don't have the reservation list yet, but if I look at this in the context of SharePoint, I just know that, okay, I'm going to have a park, and I know I can have many parks. So I'm going to have one list with all my park information, right? And from that park information list, I'm going to have the park name, the park description, maybe how many areas in the park. So that's going to be a count. I may have photos of the park, right? Now, watch what happens with the photos of the park. The photos of the park, I know, especially if this is a SharePoint list, when it comes to the photos of the park, this is just going to be an attachment column. And with the attachment column, I can attach, let me just blow this out. I can attach as many photos as I want, right? So this inherently has a one-to-many built inside of it. So I don't necessarily have to fire up a whole new list just for my photos. I'm going to just use the attachment because my attachments allow me to handle many in this one column, something that most databases do not, right? Especially older. I think the newer ones are getting there where they have these very complex column types that goes way beyond just the string, date, number, that were in Boolean, like some of the simple types that we're used to. They have these complex types to where you can store collections in a particular column. So my attachments is going to be my many for all my photos, right? And this is going to be straightforward and natural. But when I get to my areas, again, this is my area count. But now when I get to the areas to represent this is a scenario where I will launch off to another list, right? So this is going to be my areas list, and it's going to be all the areas for all the parks, right? So in here, and this is going to fit like a standard SQL thing. I'm gonna have an area. Oh, good question. So do I have? Oh, no. So the park doesn't know anything about the area list, but the area does know about the park list, right? So in here, I'm going to have an ID for the area. And in this one, I'm going to have a park ID. And this park ID is just going to be my foreign key to this guy here, right? And now I can have one-to-many. So for this park ID, I can have all ones, meaning that each one of these areas belong to that park ID with the ID of 1. And that's going to be my one-to-many. But now when I get to the area, again, I have this photo column. That's going to be my attachments, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. That's going to be my one-to-many to where I have all these photos for that area, and that's going to be associated to the park. Now, how do I get this count? Now, this count out the gate can be manual. So if I have 4 areas for this park, I may have a 4, and this is just a number column to represent that. But if I wanted this to be dynamic, then what I can do, like if they're adding areas, like they're constantly adding areas to this park, then what I would do is probably have a Power Automate run that says, okay, count up for every ID, count the number, do a query against this list, get the number of areas, and then insert that count here, right? That's something that a batch process would do and calculate that on some type of schedule. That's a scenario I can do from that. Now, the other piece would be the reservation list. And then that would be the other scenario to where, to Keelan's point, he's going to say, okay, for the current user, here's your reservations. And then each one of these reservation records, again, are going to be tied to an area, not the park, because it's actually the area, the thing that they're going to be linking to. So for his reservation, I'm going to just point to that area record, right? And then, to figure out when this area is available and things like that, I can do a combination of the reservations and find the slots and things along those lines. Not saying that this, and again, with all these relationships, I think you can tackle many scenarios with just 3 entities in the SharePoint world that could equate to 7 or 8 entities in a SQL world, right? Because we didn't talk about the lookup columns, the choice columns, again, all of those that are inherently one-to-many type scenarios, where in SQL, I have a different table for each one of those lookups, right? So it's just understanding the characteristics and the capability of a SharePoint list. And when you start to break out this data structure or this data diagram, how does that map to the benefits of SharePoint versus taking our historical setup that we're used to with SQL and then trying to apply that to a SharePoint list, which is something that I see more often than not And then people get frustrated because now they have all of these joins, or they want to do all of these joins between these different SharePoint lists because they try to apply a SQL strategy onto a SharePoint entity, and it created a hot mess. All right. Hey, Joshua. Hello. All right. Mail to. Can you demo one approval process and workflow with Power Apps without Power Automate? Can you demo one approval process workflow with Power Apps? I don't know how you would do that without Power Automate. I would actually recommend not doing that without Power Automate, because Power Automate would just do just give me a scenario why you would want to avoid Power Automate. Question 2: How to bind combo box drop down data from a SharePoint configuration list to a users field. Now, okay, that actually may be an interesting one. Let me see if I can do that. Actually, I think I had a similar question this week. So if we look at, let me see here. If I understand the question correctly, now this is how I'm gonna do it, and you just let me know if this is on point or not. So let me find. Actually, let me switch this over. Let me find. You guys have some really good questions today, and thank you all. Thanks again for jumping in on this Saturday to get this through. All right, so let me see if I can. Let me see if I can tackle this. So if I'm looking at PA ideas, all right. So these are ideas received. All right. So let's say, how do you want to do this? So one way I can do this, no problem, Mohammed. So mail 2, so you're asking how to bind a combo box drop down of data from a SharePoint configuration list of user fields. A combo box. Okay, so say for example, if I'm understanding you correctly, and I've seen this, like this works in a scenario where you have a user mapping list to these items, right? So say for example, if I'm looking at this item, okay, so this is somewhat, if I'm looking at this item in Power Automate, what would happen is we get this idea, and based on the category of this idea, I need to route this to a different group of people, right? And I don't think I have a category on this. Oh yeah, here we go. So based on technology, this is a prime example. So based on this technology that there's an idea on. So say for example, there's an idea on Power Automate. I have a separate team that deals with Power Automate. If an idea or question came in on Power Apps, I have a separate team for Power Apps. So let's do that. So if I go here and I create this list, I'm gonna just call this the technology team, right, for lack of a better term. So if I call this technology team and show and navigation, yeah, I'm fine with that. And here, I'm struggling now because I don't know how to use this title. So let's just do this. Let's just do, okay, I was going to use a choice column for my different technologies just to make them consistent, but I'm going to freestyle it now, so that's how I'm going to repurpose that title. For my team, I'm going to do this person group, right? And I'm going to do a very complex scenario. I'm going to do this person group. Actually, I may run into a wall. Yeah, let's just do a complex scenario. I'm going to do a multiple person, right? And then here, I'm going to just call this the team. Now, the reason why I selected multiple selections because there's one or two ways you can do this. You can build this out and say, okay, for each one of these, I hate the fact that I have to type in Power Apps manually. So this is not a good look at all. I would prefer to have a choice column for this, but it allows me to reuse that title. So let's just call this Power Automate, and then let's just call this one Modern SharePoint. Right now, say for example, if Power Apps had a team of 12, I can absolutely put in 12 entries and tag each individual with Power Apps, right? So that's one. Or I can use, again, if I set the flag with the multi-select, now when I click in here, I can just add in the right people to this team. So I can put in Kevin, I can put in Ashley, I can put in Madison, so on and so forth, right? So now this is going to be my team. So now when I do, you just put a few people in here, but the idea would then be that I can filter, based on the selection. Oh, that's a group, isn't it? Sorry, I can't walk and chew bubblegum. Right. So now I have this list, right? And this is and I assume when you say user field that this is the type of field where I'm dealing with a rich column type for the person group. And so now I can I can have this. So based on the selection, I can pick someone from this team to route that information to, right? So that's what my technology team is going to look like. Let me add one more person here. Let me do. Let me just add Kevin here. I pick on Kevin a lot. All right, so let me just add Kevin here. All right, so at least each one of these have an option. So now what I can do, I can create my ideas received in this technology column. I don't have one for MS Teams, but I have enough for the other two. I can now create a Power App, and let's just modify the existing one. So let me do this. I kind of jumped in that too early, but when it's low, I do want to add a column called assign to, right? And from that assign to, I only want to pick from a set of select users. All right, so let me go here. This is just a quick way to get back to that list. You go to the data source, you click edit data, and that brings you back to the list. And then here, let me add in, and this should be a person column, right? Because we know that if you use the person column, you get all the rich functionality that comes with that. So, I can, like, say, for example, with the technology team, now that I have these people, I can click on it, get Ashley's contact information, email, like all this rich know who she reports to, all this rich information right off this people card, just because I selected the person column versus single line text, right? So here in the ideas received, I have the assigned to. Let's just scoot this over. And now when I receive this idea, I want to assign this to someone who's responsible or who's on the Power Automate team. And who's on that Power Automate team is going to be driven by this technology team list. All right, so now if I go in here, the first thing I need to do is refresh this so it knows that I have that new column. And now I can click add to add it to it. And then there's my assign to, and then click add, right? And now the technology selected is Power Automate. Let me zoom in so everyone can see. My technology is Power Automate. And now when I go to this guy, this drop down, notice how I selected this drop down. I have to unlock it, right? Because I'm modifying the behavior or the logic that comes with it. I want to drop this down to the default selected items, right? And the default selected items is going to be .parent is going to be whatever's stored inside of that site column on the SharePoint list. That's what the default is going to be. But if it's new, I want to have that driven by what we have from that technology team and allow someone to select it. So now what I want to do, I want to be able to go to no, I'm sorry. I'm not. wait, am I selecting this by default? No, that's not the intent. The intent is the assign to, when I hit this drop down, should only pull from the people assigned to the Power Automate team. I don't want them searching for everyone in the organization to assign this to. I want to limit who they can select from that by using this drop down. That's the intent. That's the purpose of this. So now what I want to do for that drop down, there is instead of setting the default value, there is an items property that says these users can come from these choice options or this list of options. And this is going to be everyone in the organization, but I want to limit that. So now what I do, I bring in my data source. So let me search on SharePoint as my data source. And I want to bring in the technology team list. So here's my PA idea site, and then here's my technology team. Go ahead and click connect. And I should just simply be able to do a filter. I should be able to do a filter on technology team, and only where title, right? Because you remember I reused that title column on the technology team list, is equal to whatever values here. And right now the default name is going to be data card value 4, but I need to rename this. And this is the best practice I do. Anytime I use a component or element in a formula, I want to give it a developer-friendly name. So now I can say where my technology equals v technology dot and text. So really, whatever text values in there, I wanted to bring that filter, bring those records back. If you look at the records that are brought back, notice how it brings back that single line or that one list item that's in the list and a ton of other information, but it's this team column that I want to use to hydrate this drop down. So in order to do that, you do .team, and then that just narrows down that particular column. And if I hold down my Alt key and look at the drop down, I don't see anything. Let's just run this in play mode. No, I think I'm missing something. What am I missing? So, oh, wait. If I hit the drop down, I should get a collection. Let me click this edit here. Yeah, see, that's a collection of person group field. I think this is a collection within a collection, right? So I don't want to filter. I always make this mistake, and I'm glad I made it. When I do a filter, I'm telling this formula that I'm expecting a collection or many matches. If I do a lookup, I'm telling it I'm only expecting one match, and it returns a record versus a collection or an array. So now once I change that and told my formula that I'm only expecting one record, then it'll say, okay, here's your record. Which column do you want to look at? And I want to say, I want to look at this team column. And you can see as I'm mousing over these different methods, it's giving me a sample of what to expect. So now the fact that I only expect one record in that team column is a multi-select, I should get a collection of users. So now if I hold down my Alt key, there's my collection of users. Now, this looks nasty. It's not as beautiful as it can be. The good news is you can control what that should look like. So now if you click on edit, you can tell it off of these different placeholders, really you have 3, and then what field you want to search on, which from that record, right, from this record here, or this table, which one of these columns you want to use to display in that placeholder. And it guesses at the best. So image, it should be the picture column, but primary text should probably be their display name, and then secondary text should probably be their email address. And then when I search, I probably want to search on their display name. All right, so that's how you wire up that combo dropdown. So now if I hit the Alt key, this is more like it, and now this looks pretty close to what I'm looking for. So now if I test this out, now that's what it looks for Power Automate, and then I can select DeShon, and DeShon would be assigned this. But if I switch this to Power Apps, I'm expecting a different list, and then there are my Power Apps folks right there. And then if I select MS Teams, which I do not have an entry on, I hit the drop down, it's going to say 0 because in that lookup, there are no results because I don't have anyone part of that team. But basically, that's how you do it. And again, it's just a matter of figuring out the right structure and then selecting the right data types for that. But yeah, that's how you do it. And if I had to do this all over, this would absolutely be a choice, right? Because, someone can leave the S off of Power Apps and that would break my logic and all this other fun stuff. So, this would absolutely be a choice drop down. And then for my team assignment, again, just to kind of make sure things are crisp and there's no room for user error or minimize the user error, instead of using this title single line text, I would absolutely have a choice column with different technology options. So hopefully that helps. All right, in case of a combo box, how can we show the secondary value from a filter result and the primary from a value column of choice? Oh, almost like a cascading dropdown. So in the case of a combo box, how can we show the secondary value from a filter result and the primary value column of choice? I think I understand. So it will almost be the same scenario, right? So imagine if this was a choice column. You see how when I wire this up, how I'm doing that v.text, even though that's just a single line text. If this was a combo, it would be v.selected. Instead of selected items, I would do .selected .text, and then that would give me the selected value from that first combo, and then that would automatically rerun this filter to give me the available dropdown. I think that's what you're asking. If that's not the case, add a little bit of clarity. But yeah, that's our classic cascading dropdown to where you selecting the value here, like city and state. So I'm gonna select the state first, and then only available cities in that state would be available here, and then I can select that option. All right. I think we got everything. Thanks, Raj. I think we have everything. All right. Yeah, so I think I try to keep these under 90 minutes. I go in with at least 60 minutes of material, but I try to keep these down to 90 minutes. But yeah, definitely fill out that form. If you haven't already, I dropped a form link in the chat box. If there's any ideas or questions or different scenarios, this was a really good session, by the way, today. Thank you all for coming with your questions, and hopefully, and that's the thing, it's hard to really get the context of a chat. I'm trying to figure out a way how we can invite people to join me on the stage, so to speak. With this technology platform that I'm using, I can actually share a link out and then invite you to come on, and then that way we can have a two-way dialogue. Everyone can watch that interaction, and this software also allows you to share your screen, so that way you can tee up your question and say, okay, I have a question about this, You share your screen, you walk us through it, and then I can provide some consulting or coaching along those lines. So we'll probably try that in the next one. So just two things to talk about. We talked about Keelan, who's the intern joining, looking for summer work, and I don't know if he's excited about Power Apps, but he wants to learn more about what I do and some of the technologies that I'm working on. In this day and age, it's perfect, right? Because I can fire up a dev tenant. I probably have 4 of these already. Get him set up, get him licensed and whatever. We get 25 licenses for free in our dev tenant. So he has his own space. He has his own site collection that he's working in, and we're walking through it. So, but because he's working with me, I can now have him help me out with one of the things I've been wanting to do forever, and you guys have been asking me about it, is the SP Classroom site. And SP Classroom was really meant to be a blog site. No, it was really meant to be like an online learning classroom, but absolutely free, right? I wasn't going to do the paid thing, only because my contribution to the community is to give real world experiences and different strategies and different solutions and different techniques using the Power Platform in organization, as well as and that will be two-way learning for me to understand some of the issues, concepts, concerns, adoptions, and things that you all are facing within your respective organizations. So it was really meant to be that two-way, which is why I didn't want to put a price on top of that, right? And then I want the flexibility that if I'm busy, like next week, there's no Q&A session because we're breaking for the holiday weekend. I wanted that flexibility and not have like that monetary obligation to where I had to do this for X, right? So he's going to help me build out SP Classroom, really get that up and running again. All these sessions I want to post there. I want to have a link to the form and ideas and things like that all in one spot. And then also, here's another thing I haven't been able to share, especially with SPFX, is a lot of code samples and links to my Git repo to where, a lot of people can use those as a starting point and then be able to start their projects and things like that. I'm very careful not to share all of my source code, right? Not for the fact of sharing. I want to do that. I want to share as much as I can, but the fact of handicapping someone to not going that extra mile to learn it. And I know that if they're just looking for sample code, and that's a community I don't want to build. I don't want to build a community of people who just want to grab code and get things done, or grab code and charge others money for the code that we create, right? I don't think that's ethically sound. But I do want to create an environment to where I don't want you not to be able to go to that next level because of a code piece that that's holding you back, or you're stuck, right? I want to share code in that type of way. And I want to share reusable code with the understanding that you're building this massive solution, but there are some core things that really, like, once you build it once, you never have to touch it again. And it may be good to understand how it works in the event that you have to tweak it, but not spend a lot of time to build it. Those are the components I would absolutely love to share, right, within this community. So Keelan's going to be working on SP Classroom, building up a lot of that blog and baseline and public-facing internet site. And we also he's cleaning up my YouTube channel as well. So, my thumbnails are not the best, right? He took a look at them. He was like, your thumbnails are not the best. And my keyword association, so how people can find my videos, are probably not optimized. So he's going to help me with those, as well as put more structure and rigor around maybe some of the timetables, right? And we see that feature now, that if you put a timetable in in the description, people can now use that as a catalog or a track to find out or to, skip ahead to the part of the video that they're really interested in. So he's going to help us out on a lot of that. I only have him until the second week in August because that's when he starts back to school. So we're going to try to cram as much as we can within that time frame to kind of help us out and give us all a good footing to start off with for the summer project. All right. Oh, we got one more question. Okay, maybe I have time for one more. They say how to change Power Apps screens based on status value, based on the current login. Okay, Mel too. Let me circle back on that one. Akshay has how to create a multi-language site in Team. Oh, this is the one you hit me up on in the comment section. Yes, thanks for reminding me. All right, so Akshay, so if you look at this, let me share my screen, and Mail to if I have a chance to get back to your other question, I will. So let me keep this tab open because I think I can answer Akshay's real quick. So if I look at, let me go to SharePoint. So this is what Akshay is looking at, and I did a video on this. I'm switching tenants because I just have some scenarios better set up. So if you look at this scenario here I can switch my site to multiple languages. The multilingual story in SharePoint is light years ahead of where it used to be in 2013 and 2016 versions of SharePoint. So Akshay is asking, okay, if I go here and I create a new site, and I understand I only have two options, and I create, instead of communication site, which is what I showed you, if I create one in Team, how do I do this in a multilingual way, right? So here, if I do, let's say, I'm going to just call this the French Connect. And of course, I didn't spell this right. And then you have your Gmail, everything that comes with a Team site. This is all you have, unfortunately. This is all you have. So now you select French here, and you click next, and I'm gonna add Kevin as my backup. And again, we always talked about the best practice with making sure every site has a backup owner. So here, if I go here, remember I set the primary language as French. What it's showing me is all of the English translations of the default labels that come with this site. This has zero impact on what I need to do with my custom content. So I can come in here and create, because all these labels are still in English, I can come in here and create articles and have them, those are new features popping up. And I can create articles and then just replace all of this text with the French versions of that. And then all my copy, I can put that in French, fine, no problem. All right. But because I did the primary language, I can now go to site information, view all site settings, and go to this one. Where is it? It's the language setting. Where's my regional settings for language? Language settings here. And in this language setting, all it shows me is the supported languages. And really, this is limited to the languages that are available using the out-of-the-box menus and things along those lines. So because I'm coming here with English, if I say I'm not going to support English, or if you come in and uncheck all of these, usually if you just uncheck English, it's going to force it to that primary language. And that's what this grid says. This grid says, these are all the languages I support, and these are the preferred languages by the current user. If you come in here and say, I prefer to see this in English, and you say, I don't support English, it's going to default to the primary language. And in our scenario, the primary language is set to French, right? So ideally, you want to uncheck all of these. And then once you save this off, now that all of my out of the box, you notice that everything now is going to be in French. and this is how you force it. But this is a much different experience than the translation option that I showed in with the communication site. So basically what this would do now, like every user that comes in, now that I uncheck English, that comes to this site where English is their preferred language, they're going to all see French. But if I am a user where my preferred language is Spanish, I will see all of these out-of-the-box labels, which are inherently supports multilingual. Those are actually going to be in Spanish. And when I create any custom content that I create, they're going to see the French version of that content, but on my labels navigation, that's out of the box. The keyword is out of the box. So all my labels and all that stuff that's out of the box will be in Spanish, right? So ideally what you want to do is to go through and uncheck all of those languages, force everyone to see this in French, and then go ahead and proceed with creating your content in French. The biggest question is going to be, what about my other team languages, right? You just follow the exact same concept. You go back to the home site, the hub site entry, create a new site, go to French, and now call this the Spanish Connect, and then proceed with the exact same thing. So you go make the primary language Spanish, go to your language settings. So let me go Spanish here. Go to your language settings, and then uncheck all languages except for, and then uncheck all languages, which will force everybody to use Spanish or to view your site in Spanish. This is what we would call translation 2.0, translation services 2.0. Whereas right now, what I showed you in the communication site was translation services 3.0, right? And translation services 1.0 was variations. It was that variation piece that we were used to in the previous versions of SharePoint, where you have one site collection and then a sub-site for each language. Here, you're going to have a site collection for each language in the event you're using team sites. Now, if I'm using a communication site, and I don't know if Microsoft is going to make this capability, Translation Services 3.0, available for team sites, but for communication sites, we have this ability here. I'm going to leave the primary English, right? And then this is going to, oh, it didn't ask me for a backup. Interesting. So I'm going to leave the primary for English, but now when I go into the site information section and then go under language settings, notice how my options change. I have this option here that says translate can be used in pages and all this other stuff can be used in multiple languages. As soon as I enable that, now I get this other experience that says, which languages do you want to support? Again, I only see this capability for communication sites. So now I can select French, I can select Spanish. I have a much better, not only multilingual scenario, but I can also select translators for that multilingual scenario, because in the background, I have a workflow system that fires off when there's an English page or when there's a change to an existing page or whatever my primary language is. These guys would get, or these guys or girls would get new updates when those changes happen. And this is Translation Services 3.0, right? So it really, I mean, I say all that to say that when you look at multilingual, you have to look at, one, the translation service capability, and two, the site type that you're dealing with. If you need this multi-language capability, my recommendation would be to use communication sites. If you have existing team sites and now you're moving to a multilingual strategy, I will probably negotiate with the business and say, you have two options. One, for all your team sites, you need to duplicate, triplicate, or replicate them for every language site and set a primary language for each one of them, and manually work that translation process in the back end, or convert all of your team sites into communication sites, meaning that you're creating up a new communication site and then using a migration tool to move over your existing pages over to that communication site, only for the sake of being able to take advantage of the multi-translation piece. Yep, every language will have to have its own team site if you're using Teams. I'm sorry, I hate doing that. If you're using the team template for SharePoint. Cool. Hopefully that works. Hopefully that helps, Akshay. Okay, Mel 2, how do you change the screens based on the login user? So a status value and the login user. Okay, so let me switch back to this this Power App here. The magic is going to be, and it depends on how you're using this too. If you're using a form within SharePoint, and if you look at the Q&A session in the last week, you will see that. And sorry, these are so long because I know it makes it hard, especially without Keelan putting in the timetable. It will make it hard to find this. But in our session last week, we talked about that. So in the SharePoint integration, say for example, I'm going to edit mode, and before editing this, so for any user that's about to edit this, what I would do is do a lookup. Notice the navigate, right? This says I'm in edit mode, so I'm going to navigate to the screen. You can put additional information around this. So you can say something like if V technology, I'm going to use that as my status field in your scenario. If V technology, and this is a field on this list, equals Power Apps, this is where you would check the status, go ahead and navigate them to this screen, else navigate them to the main screen or something like that, right? So if, oops, I got my parenthesis in the wrong place. That's why I threw an error. So here I can say if it equals Power Apps, navigate to that screen, else navigate them to a screen new, right? And this would just be your name of the different screens, right? So vtechnology.text, so the text value in that. So if you had a status column, this is exactly what you would do. So you would do whatever your status is, .selected, .text, and then whatever you want to test against, and then you navigate them to the different screen. The same is true for your current user, right? So with the current user, here's a pro tip. When you're dealing with users, it's good to set the value into a local variable. So let's just call var role, and this is going to be my user role. And then I'm going to do a lookup against that technology, that team, what do we call it? Technology team list, right? And where, and this schema probably doesn't support this well. So where team, I'm gonna have to fake this because here's a collection. Can I do another lookup here? No. Yeah, this wants a. Yeah, this gets nasty real quick. So anyway, but if I'm gonna have to cheat here, so I'm gonna do first team. I don't have the right schema. I don't have the right schema here. But let's just imagine I'm a fake this, right? So if my title equals the current user dot email, right? So let's just imagine title determines the role for the current user, right? So let's just say I have this user in this lookup list, and then based on that, it returns a role. I would set that value here, and then here I would say if it's Power Apps and the var role equals admin, then navigate them here, or verse navigate them here. So basically, you just have to grab the role or the information for the current user based off of some list. And this is where I would cheat, right? I would cheat and make sure that this schema allows for this type of scenario in a fast way. Save that value here, and then in this information, go ahead and grab the current value status of the current item, and then with the combination of those two, be able to navigate that. But the key is to put all of that information here in the SharePoint integration piece, to where, based on the mode that what they're trying to do, they can view that. If you're dealing with a Canvas app where you do not have a SharePoint integration, understanding that SharePoint integration is only available for the list of custom forms on a SharePoint list, then you would have to do something here on start, the same logic on start, to where you're grabbing information from the user against your lookup, and you're grabbing information based on the current status of the selected item, and then you're making a decision from there. All right. Okay. I know, Akshay, you have one more, but I do have to go. This has been 2 hours. We try to keep this down to 30 minutes. But yeah, just fill out that questionnaire on the form, submit it, and then I'll go ahead and queue it up, or ask me a question in the comment section of any one of the videos, and we'll queue it up. Again, we don't have a Q&A session next Saturday, but we will have a Q&A session. So the next one, so we don't have one on the 3rd, and we will resume again on the 10th. All right. Until then, you guys have a great weekend. Thank you so much for joining me on this Q&A. It was actually a ton of fun. I will look at different capabilities to where we can interact more and hopefully bring people on the stage with me. We do a split screen. We do a screen share, all this other fun stuff to get your questions answered. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. And until then, take care of yourself. And I think that's it. Bye.